Hi everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. Is that Thanksgiving Day from a windy and wintry Sedona. We're going to get snow tomorrow, which is unusual here, but that should be fun. Um, I have read all your essays and made comments, and I'll be sending them back to you today and tomorrow. And I just have to type the comments in. Um, I liked all your essays. It's just very interesting to me how there's this affection, intuitive affection for the Yugas, as opposed to Ken Wilber. And I think that that's very telling, and I know that there are reasons for it. Um, but I still have this curiosity about what is it really about the Yugas that's so appealing. And anyway, coming out of your essays, I do want to just make a few comments that relate to the idea of the Yugas and versus Wilber, that I feel are significant differences or distinctions between the two. I'm not trying to be exhaustive about that. I'm just zeroing in on things that you might not have zeroed in on them. First of all, one of the things that's a little confusing to me about the Yugas is it's a repetitive cycle, right? It's a cycle, and and it's not clear to me. Well, okay, in the strict definition of a cycle, so the Earth going around the Sun, or any sort of any kind of cycle that we might have, the strict definition of a cycle is that something returns to its original point, right? So whatever point you would take in the cycle of the Yugas, we're going to come back to that point. And to be a cycle, strictly speaking, one has to return exactly to that point. Now, the Earth going around the Sun doesn't exactly return to the same point. I mean, there are all kinds of orbital cycles and periodicities that we know about, and nothing is ultimately that precise. But it's pretty close to being, to being returning to the same point. And so in the cycle of the Yugas, it's not clear to me, and this doesn't appear to be talked about. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not clear to me that that's not what happens. It's that we actually return right back to that same point. And then if that interpretation of cyclicity were the case, then we'd have a hard time using the evidence that we have, historical archaeological evidence, to justify it, right? Because we'd expect to see, prior to us, we'd expect to see a technological phase of our existence that happened before, and so 24,000 years ago, roughly, and just like this one that we're in now, and it's inconceivable. I don't care what they say in the book. Inconceivable. There wouldn't be any archaeological trace of that happening. Things would be preserved in all kinds of special circumstances. That's what happens with fossils. So there's no doubt to me that there would be trace that a prior technological age would have left traces that we would find, and so that strict definition of cyclicity then doesn't work, seems to me, for the Yugas. But having said that, what if we relax it? So what if it's not a strict cyclicity? Maybe it's a spiral or something, that a cycle that kind of evolves with time in some way that is unspecified actually in the discussion of the Yugas. Then we can start to say, well, okay, maybe we can sort of fit that in. It's really a cycle in consciousness, not a cycle in the external, the exact external appearance of what that consciousness looks like. That would be one way. And I think that's what we have to do, right? And the cyclicity. Well, again, for me, there's this obvious sort of contrast with there's a kind of metaphysical underpinning for the cycle of the Yugas that is you know, originally they put it forth as a kind of an astronomical, there's an astronomical reason for it, so that there was a companion star or something, and that our relationship to that changed on this kind of cyclicity. And now we, of course, know that that's not true, but we do have the precession of the equinoxes, which doesn't fit with a 24,000 year cycle. It's 25,772 years, the precession of the equinoxes. So we know that well. So it's like there's a slight mismatch there. And then it's like, why does precession of the equinoxes cause this degree of this kind of a cycle? There's a sort of a metaphysical underpinning that's not entirely clear where this cycle is coming from and how it's being driven. The precession of the equinoxes does not put the Earth in a different energy field, or it's just simply a wobble of the Earth's axis, where, you know, in its orbit around the Sun, or you know, over a period of time, in similar orbit around the Sun, wobble of the axis. So it's not entirely clear what would drive that, but it does somewhat relate to a kind of if one gets into astrology, then there is this sort of astrologic basis with the actual equinoxes progressing through the signs of the zodiac, each one lasting 2,100 or something years, each sign of the zodiac as it processes. So then one is sort of connecting with a whole different stream of things. In Wilber's model, he talks about an idea that was, I think, well, not really, but was made known by Teilhard de Chardin, who talked about the omega point. That what is driving evolution is we're drawn towards the omega point. For Wilber, the omega point is the existence of the next level, which kind of draws us towards it, has a magnetism to it. And for Wilber, the nature of that magnetism, the nature of that force comes out of Plato or ancient Greece, and it's the word eros. It's a kind of love. And so this kind of love, this is an evolutionary kind of love. We have this evolutionary kind of love, and it draws us forward to evolve to the next level. We're drawn forward by a kind of love, a love for a love to evolve, love for the next level, whatever you might call that. And so that's the sort of metaphysical underpinnings of the reason for this whole progress through the stages of spiral dynamics is this love, eros, and the existence of that, of course, is unexplained. That kind of goes back to these sort of scientific things. It's like it just is. We just have it. It just is, kind of thing. So underpinning, I think, both of these models is a kind of it just is. The metaphysical driving force underneath each one is like, it just is. And so this is what happens. We're not really given a reason for it, or, you know, a deep sort of explanation. I find it to be somewhat unsatisfying, actually, in both cases. But having said that, I want to sort of say that one of the big distinctions for me has to do with, I guess I would call this epistemology. How do we know what we know? And so it's the epistemic underpinnings of each theory are extremely different, right? Wilber is underpinned by his attempt to gather objective evidence, and so his is really you've all identified this, a kind of scientific approach. I mean, there's the experience of so the gathering of evidence via empirical means, then the use of induction and deduction based on that evidence, right? And so this is a a particular kind of approach that we have championed in our modern culture, and I think it reveals only a narrow sector of possible knowledge or knowing. Nevertheless, it's been powerful. It's created our world of technology and current knowledge. But Wilber's is based on that, whereas the Yugas is something that's come out of ancient spiritual texts, incredibly ancient spiritual texts, right? The Vedas, and also more recent texts, Mahabharata, and so these one will regard. What is the source of the idea of the Yugas? One would have to say that it's a kind of revelation, right? This is something that has come through deep spiritual practice and through insight and revelation to these ancient sages, and then has been put down in, well, first of all passed orally and then put down in writing. But so the source of it's a really different kind of source for this information than Wilber's is, and that's in itself is quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's like let's go at the problem this way and see what kind of thing we get. Let's go at the problem this other way, and let's see what we get. We get these two very different things, and I sort of suggest, as I have for a long time, that we don't. It doesn't. I'm sorry that the questions are couched in an either-or basis or this versus that basis, because it's like, well, what can we value about both of these? Because they're coming from really different angles and they're bringing something different to the table. And so let's, perhaps the more challenging approach to these is to hold both as true and see where we get to in our understanding if we do that. Because what happens is if we hold both as true, at some point our understanding will transcend and include both. We'll welcome that to happen, right? We're not going to be limited into each of these models. Hold both. It forces the evolution to another level to be able to include both. And I think that's a worthy goal for us in this. But I think that a lot of you sort of clued in on this sort of element of the Yugas being more encompassing, and I'm like, well, what is it really? What is really more encompassing about the Yugas? And it seems to me that it's this aspect that will never yield to Wilber's approach, evidence-based approach, which makes it very this-worldly. Some of you said that this world, not otherworldly. It's like he can't talk about souls and the journey of souls between lifetimes and the evolution of the soul. I mean, there isn't such a thing, really, as far as Wilber's concerned, as that. So, but coming out of a tradition like the Vedas, yes, you can talk about those things. There are insights about those things. And so then the cycle of the Yugas, only in that respect does it start to make sense that there's an evolution of souls, that between lifetimes and where one comes in these cycles, it's all important, it all matters. And this is part of a larger process that goes sort of beyond this world, right? It's beyond this world. And so this, for me, that's more satisfying. Someone who is a transpersonalist, it's going to be more satisfying, I think, to have this perspective, to have a larger perspective, because after all, we might focus on the paranormal and evidence for the paranormal or near-death experiences, and Wilber doesn't even touch these things, right? He can't touch these things. Everything for Wilber has four quadrants, which means everything is attached to matter, and so there's no possibility of these kinds of things, and he's going to be proven wrong at some point, because we'll find that the realm of thought and spirit really matters. Okay. No pun intended. A final thought, it has to do with somewhat of a criticism of the Yugas, I would say, is that, or at least this rendition of the Yugas, is that it does seem to me as though life is described as a school where we are to learn, and it's our souls that are learning, in the case of the Yugas, really, I think. And so life is this school, and that I think we haven't spoken about this, but lining this up against Casey, what we studied about Casey, which with this idea of evolutionary spirituality, that doesn't really line up with that. In other words, there's another reason, not just to learn, not just to be here to have a lesson. There's another reason we're here, which is to sort of get on board with the whole process, to help the whole process. We're here in a kind of in this role of service, like the bodhisattvas. We each have a bodhisattva in us, right? We're here to help the whole process. We're a part of it. We're a corpuscle in the blood of God, this kind of thing. And so that's not really, I don't see that as being really treated by the Yugas. It sort of retreats more to that sort of life's a school, life's a lesson thing, and we just go round and round this till you jump off. Okay, so there's that. And well, you know, Wilber doesn't have any of that. All he has is eros, and it's like we did have the involution at some point in the past, which Wilber doesn't specify. Presumably, when matter was first formed, that was the descent. That was actually when spirit arrived, and then ever since then, spirit's been working its way back. So for his appears to me a much more unidirectional process. You know, it's okay. We created matter. Spirit's in it. Spirit caused it, is in it. Now matter has to evolve. Matter with the 4 quadrants, because you know, and it's so once you got matter, then you've got it all. You got all you need, because each matter has an interior and exterior. So then it's going to work its way back. Then you're in the process of evolution. So that fits with science, right? So we created matter at the Big Bang. That's the beginning. That's the descent. That's the involution. Now, along with modern science, we're going to have this evolutionary cosmology, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, consciousness, evolving all the time back to that, whatever the prior state was. So those were just some comments. Let me just see. I had some notes here just to see if I missed anything. So, yes. Oh, yeah, there's just one more comment I want to make. God, keep talking. One more comment I want to make about Wilber's model. You will have noticed that as we studied Wilber's model, the progression of Wilber's model with time, it got more complicated as time went on. This is typical of this kind of model in the sciences as well. So because you make a model and then you find it doesn't fit. So what happens is you add another variable, right? And this, I think of variables as like little knobs and dials that you can twist on the model. It's like, oh, I just have this one knob on this model to turn, and I can't quite make it fit reality. So I'll add another knob on the model, and then I'll start turning that, and that helps me tune it in to parts of reality that didn't explain with that first knob. And then I add another knob, so it goes with, first of all, this sort of progressive evolution that didn't originally include spiral dynamics. And then you include spiral dynamics, which makes it more detailed. You add the 4 quadrants because things aren't explained for it. Then you add multiple lines of evolution. It's not just cognitive, it's multiple lines. So all of these are just adding more and more sort of knobs and dials, states and stages, and so forth. And then once we've got enough dials, we can tune this model to fit anybody. I can fit you. I can fit any variation on this theme because I've created enough knobs and dials. But that's not a good process, I don't think, scientifically. So that would be a critique for me. It's like, yeah, he's made the model so complicated that it will fit reality. And that's something we can do. We do it in science. I've seen it happen in science all the time. We make well, at that point, we find ourselves in the position of having a model, but we don't really understand the model. So we have to then study the model to understand it. But the model was originally designed to help us understand reality. And so I feel there's an element of sort of forcing the situation, the adding of complexity to a model with time in order to take account of all of the variables it's not a well, it pushes things in the direction that actually much of science has gone. So for example, with the standard model of particle physics, it's not at all satisfying because it's so complex, and one assumes that under there, somewhere underneath everything, there's a kind of simplicity to the world, to reality, to existence. And so you lose sight of that once you make them more and more complicated. And the model of the Yugas has the advantage of being extremely simple and like you've all said, encompassing. And that is, there's a certain power to that, a certain appeal to that. The whole Occam's razor thing, there's a certain appeal to it. So, and I think that may be another reason why we're drawn to it versus Wilber. So I guess that's enough. I've spoken far too long. Again, happy Thanksgiving, and I'll be getting your essays back to you as soon as possible. I'll certainly put up the scores immediately, and have to type in the comments because I read I read them and scribble on the. That's the way I do it. Okay, you're having a good week, and I'll be making another video soon. And thanks for all your essays. That was fun. Okay, bye.